Hello again, everyone. This is a video on my making and scratch building a code 148 number 4 track switch in O scale using code 148 rail from Right Away out in California, and a template, a paper template I printed out from Fast Tracks, handlaidtrack.com. Printed it out, and you can see all the dirt and dust on everything from building the switch. And just to show you, it's like, here's the switch here. I built it right on top of the template using a few simple tools. Being this is 148 steel rail, nickel, silver, and steel, or steel rail, doesn't matter, I have both. I could use the Fast Tracks jig, which I do have, but it doesn't fit Right Away rail because the bottoms don't go into it, actually. It's made for microengineering, which has a bit of a different profile than the foot of the rail. Anyway, the tools I use to build the switch with is one, this track gauge that I made in a machine shop in Sunset Park, Brooklyn, many years ago. It was made on a Bridgeport milling machine. All right, it's just a simple piece of aluminum, very finely measured for O scale, for OW5 actually, not P48. Using it's a piece of aluminum that I cut and then drilled and inserted these pegs into, which actually help space the rails evenly. And I also use these brass rail gauges here and an O scale track standards gauge, an MRA standards gauge. The other tools I use would be a pair of needle nose pliers, a triangular file to cut through the cladding with on the PCB ties, a small square riffler file, so to speak, to file things like, and a nice big regular file to file the rail. One thing I would tell you is to use tin snips or pliers or something like that, or even like these or something like that, to cut this rail, you will ruin them. Guaranteed. You're better off using a Dremel tool or something like that with a cutoff wheel, or anything with a cutoff wheel. I use a Dremel tool and I chuck the rail in my hand. I use it in my hand, or I use it in my vise over here, my little bench vise. And then the other tool I use is this resistance soldering set. Goes up to 100 watts. And I use 80 watts. I don't use the full 100. What I do is I use 80 watts. So 100 watts would be too much, and it would cause the copper cladding to come off the PCB ties on here, all along the switch. It's not going to be using wood ties. This one is anyway. And so the PCB ties, if you use the 100 watts, it'll melt the cladding, the copper cladding, and the glue right off, because it's only glued onto the printed circuit board material, the copper. I also clean it with 91% rubbing alcohol, okay, and I use emery pads, all right, which give a nice degree of finish to get to make a nice clean surface. And I use a brush to brush it, and I use flux. So the PCB and the rails get cleaned 3 different methods to make them nice and clean for a good, clean, strong joint. The resistance soldering gives me the heat at the right exact place in a very short amount of time. And the other thing I use though is electronic solder for doing electronics. Resin core solder that's very thin. Thinner the better. I had this, so I used it, and it does work well. Cut, bend, and file the rail. You have to work step by step and methodically to go ahead and get this done correctly. As far as the curve goes in the rail, 148, you can bend this by hand. It's a little bit harder to bend, so to speak, than other rails because it's a lot thicker and a lot heavier, and it's steel also. And you have to gauge it properly. The first thing you do is you lay out your outside stock rail, this one here. All right. I assembled the frog and the wing rails on a jig that I made out of pieces of basswood. Assembled it as one piece. This was an idea given me by Charlie Pitts. He also showed me an idea too about as far as the curvature of turnouts. Like this is a number 4 that I did on a Fast Tracks jig. You can make a shorter, smaller one on anything from a number 2.5 or 2, which would be like a trolley layout, like 9-inch radius, to a number 10 or 12, which would be like 7-foot curves. I'm going to be making I made a jig for a 3.5, number 3.5 frog for my subway trains. This is going to be for freight trackage in the street. The 3.5s are going to be for my elevator structure, which is coming later on. And also to grind out, if you look here, you'll see you have to grind out part of the inside. Let me turn it over, it might be easier there. To grind out the foot of the rail underneath here so that the point rail sits right against this when it goes into it on either part of the throw. Because you want it to sit like that. Okay? So it sits nice and flush, almost completely flush. I didn't want to go ahead and dent the rail, indent it, or put a notch into it. That just wouldn't help. I didn't like that idea. Then I go ahead and you can see I soldered it along its length, all right, at the points given, and cut through the PCB tie cladding so that I could run regular locomotives on it. I cut that with a Dremel tool with a cutter wheel, or if you want to be more methodical about it, so to speak, take a couple of wipes or swipes, so to speak, or strokes with a triangular file on its edge. You use the edge of it to do it, all right? Not the face, but the edge, to cut through the cladding. Makes a nice little groove, and it's a lot less prone to damaging or breaking the PCB tie or cutting right through it. And I used printed circuit board ties that I got from Clover House. I usually get my ties from them anyway. They're pretty cool. They're pretty good. Prices are good, and I like their stuff. And it's the same thing goes for switches with wooden ties in them, but this one just has the PCB ties. But switches with wooden ties go for the same thing. It's just that you would use spikes or tie plates or whatever. And it's going to be trimmed to fit in place. And the guardrails here I made using the Fast Track's track jig and the template to bend them accordingly. And I also cut the webbing as per Charlie Pitts' advice, and somebody else, I forgot who, went ahead and cut the webbing of the rail at the foot to make it the bend in the wing rails, like the wing rails here and here, to make the bends a little bit sharper, so to speak. I cut into the webbing foot of the rail. All right, so that it bends sharper using my vise over here, my bench vise, and a pair of pliers, heavy pliers. You know, actually I used lineman pliers, you know, electricians' linesman pliers. That makes it actually fits the track really nicely in these grooves, the rail, and put it in the bench vise, and it does a nice bend. And you got to make sure everything is clean, and everything is like, I mean, the PCB ties in the bottom of the rail, the sides of the rail, and everything have to be really clean. And because the resistance soldering set needs a good connection to do its work. And once you have it, it does it very quickly. It'll melt it within a second or two, no more than 5 seconds. The solder's melted and the joint is made, and it cools off just as quickly as it heats up. One thing I love about this machine, it's almost like a godsend, so to speak, for making switches. Anyway, if you have any comments or questions or critiques or anything, please just let me know, message me, email me, or whatever. All right? Hope you guys enjoy the video. Later.